We typically either cremate or bury the deceased, based on religious and personal beliefs. However, people from around the world practice an array of unusual rituals in order to commemorate and dispose of the dead. Here are 10 of those rituals. Sati is a Hindu practice in which a recently widowed woman is burned to death on her husband's funeral pyre. This is either done voluntarily or by the use of force. Other forms of sati also exist, such as being buried alive and drowning. This practice was particularly popular in southern India and among the higher castes of society. Sati is considered the highest expression of wifely devotion to her dead husband. Also, it was deemed an act of peerless piety and was said to purge her of all her sins, release her from the cycle of birth and rebirth, and ensure salvation for her dead husband and the 7 generations that followed her. The alternative, anyway, was not appealing. After the death of a husband, an Hindu widow was expected to live the life of an ascetic, renouncing all social activities, shaving her head, eating only boiled rice and sleeping on thin coarse matting. To many, death may have been preferable. The practice was outlawed in 1827, but it has still occasionally occurred in some parts of India. The Vikings' funeral and burial rituals were affected by their pagan beliefs. They believed that death would lead them into an afterlife and into one of the 9 Viking realms. Because of this, they tried their hardest to send the deceased to a successful afterlife. They typically did this either by cremation or inhumation. The funeral of a Viking chief or king was much more bizarre. According to an account of one such death ritual, a chief's body was placed in a temporary grave for 10 days while new clothes were being prepared for him. During this time, one of his thrall women had to volunteer herself to join the chief in the afterlife. She was then guarded day and night and given plenty of alcohol. Once the funeral ceremony started, she had to sleep with every man in the village. She was then strangled with a rope. The bodies of the chief and the woman were then placed on a wooden ship, which served as the cremation pyre. Vamadahana is a ceremony that is used to honor the dead. It is the most commonly practiced traditional festival in the southern highlands of Madagascar. It occurs every 7 years during winter in Madagascar. Tears and crying are banned, and the ceremony is seen as festive, unlike that of a burial. The ritual starts when the corpses are exhumed from their graves and rewrapped in new shrouds. Before the bodies are reinterred, they are hoisted up and carried around their tombs several times so that they can become familiar with their resting places. The celebration features loud music, dancing, parties with lots to drink, and feasting. A tower of silence, or dikma, is a funerary structure used by people of Zoroastrian faith. It is a practice of disposing of the dead by exposing the bodies to the sun and vultures. According to Zoroastrian belief, the 4 elements fire, water, earth, and air are sacred and should not to be polluted by the disposal of the dead through cremation and burial. In order to avoid polluting these elements, Zoroastrians expose the corpses to scavenging animals. The vultures can then come and eat their flesh. The remaining bones are left to be dried and bleached by the sun before being deposited in an ossuary. These towers can be found both in Iran and India. Kiribati is an island nation in the Pacific Ocean. In present times, its people practice mostly Christian burials, but this was not always the case. Before the 19th century, they practiced what is called the skull burial, in which they kept the skull at home so that the native god could welcome the deceased spirit to the afterlife. After someone died, their body would stay at home for 3 to 12 days for people to pay their respects. To make the body smell nice, they would burn leaves near it and put flowers in the corpse's mouth, nose, and ears. They could also rub the body with coconut and other scented oils. A few months after the body was buried, family members would dig up the grave and remove the skull, polish it, and display it in their home. The deceased's widow or child would sleep and eat next to the skull and carry it with them wherever they went. They could also make necklaces out of the fallen teeth. After several years, they would rebury the skull. People of the Igorot tribe in northern Philippines have been burying their dead in hanging coffins, nailed to the sides of cliff faces, for more than 2 millennia. They believe that moving the bodies of the dead higher up brings them closer to their ancestral spirits. The corpses are buried in a fetal position, as the Igorot people believe that a person should leave the world the same way they entered it. Nowadays, younger generations adopt more modern and Christian ways of life, so this ancient ritual is slowly dying out. The Japanese Shingon monks believed that the practice of self-mummification was believed to grant them access to heaven and protected humans on earth. The process of mummifying themselves from inside out required utmost devotion and self-discipline. The process of Sakushin Butsu started off with the monk adopting a diet consisting of only tree roots, barks, nuts, berries, pine needles, and even stones. This diet helped eliminate any fat and muscle as well as bacteria from the body. It could last anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 days. The monk continued with the meditation practice while drinking only small amounts of salinized water. As death approached, he would rest in a small, tightly cramped pine box, which would be buried. The corpse would then be unearthed after 1,000 days. If the body had stayed intact, it meant that the deceased had become Sakushin Butsu. The body would then be dressed in robes and put in a temple for worship. The whole process could take more than 3 years to complete. It is believed that 24 monks successfully mummified themselves, but this ritual was criminalized in 1877.